Welcome to the Reddit mic.
A woman forced into a life or death situation in her own home after months of just sheer terror.
Exactly. A waking nightmare is how it sounds.
So where did this nightmare even begin? It wasn't like a long relationship, right? Not even really a short one.
No, not at all. The sources are clear. It started incredibly simply. Just 2 dates. That's it.
2 dates.
And when she decided, look, this isn't a good fit, and she clearly told him she wasn't interested, well, that's when things just escalated almost immediately. And the speed was terrifying.
Right after she said no.
Right after. The original posts and updates described the sudden, overwhelming flood of contact attempts. We're talking like dozens of calls every single day.
Dozens.
Yeah. And text messages. Pages and pages of them. 50 pages, one source mentioned.
50 pages of text.
Yeah. And it didn't stay digital for long. That's a key thing here, how quickly it moved into physical invasion. He started showing up outside her home really early, like 5 a.m. sometimes.
Oh my God. 5 a.m.? That's incredibly fast, going from zero to absolute obsession in just days, basically. And this escalation, it had immediate, like, real-world consequences for her, didn't it?
Devastating consequences. We learned from the sources that she was actually evicted, kicked out of her apartment building.
Evicted? Why?
Because her neighbors felt unsafe. They were scared because of his constant menacing presence around their homes, too.
Wow. So her stalker's actions made her lose her home.
Exactly. So facing that, losing her home, feeling totally unsafe, she tried, the legal route. She applied for a temporary protective order, a TPO.
Okay, a TPO. That's supposed to offer legal protection, right? Compel him to stay away.
Supposed to, yeah. It's a civil court order designed for that. But, well, what happened next shows how flimsy that protection can be sometimes.
Yeah, let me read.
The sources show the stalker basically treated it like a joke. He actively evaded the process servers, the people whose job it is, to physically hand him the official TPO papers.
So he just dodged them.
Yeah. And he even sent her a taunting picture message. It was of the note the sheriff's deputy had left at his door. And he explicitly called the protective order just a piece of paper.
Just a piece of paper.
And because he wasn't officially served, the order couldn't actually be enforced by the police. It was useless.
That line, just a piece of paper, knowing what happened later, it's just chilling.
So, okay, legal avenues are failing. She's lost her home. She felt she had no choice but to try and disappear, right? Relocate.
Try and vanish. But he wasn't giving up. He actually vowed he would find her.
And he went to incredible lengths to do it.
Extraordinary, disturbing lengths. The sources detail it. He somehow found her mother's address, someone he'd never even met.
Her mother's?
How? It's not entirely clear how, but he did. And he sent the victim a map of her mom's home, like a picture of it.
That's terrifying. What else?
He attempted this fake landlord scam, sent her a link, basically a phishing link, designed to grab her IP address if she clicked it.
Okay, hang on. Getting someone's IP address, What does that actually tell a stalker? Well, it can potentially reveal their general geographic location. Sometimes, depending on the internet provider and setup, maybe even down to the street level. For a stalker, that's like gold.
A digital breadcrumb trail.
Exactly. Leading right to you.
So she's trying to erase her digital footprint, go invisible online.
Yeah, she fought back digitally too, systematically dismantling her online presence. But his persistence just highlights this really disturbing reality about modern stalking, doesn't it? How easily people can track you across so many platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. Even when she blocked him.
He'd just create new accounts. The sources list the usual suspects, Reddit, Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook.
He even added her old high school classmates on Facebook.
Yeah, trying to get info probably, but it didn't stop there. Meetup. Duolingo, believe it or not.
Duolingo, the language app.
And somehow, he even found or reactivated an old MySpace account to try and reach her. MySpace,
wow. That just shows the sheer level of obsessive effort is hard to even wrap your head around.
It's terrifying. And the threats, they just kept escalating. He tried using weird postal service tricks like marking mail with address correction requested, do not forward, hoping the post office would send back her new address.
Did that work?
It doesn't seem like it, but the attempt itself is chilling. He also created fake social media profiles using her photos, her likeness.
Impersonating her.
Yeah. And even worse, posting semi-nude pictures of her as blackmail, trying to coerce her. And the threats weren't just against her anymore. They explicitly included her family.
God. just multi-pronged psychological warfare. And despite her trying to hide, he still showed up physically at the new place.
He did. The physical appearances continued. One source details this incident, August 21st, 2014, so just weeks before the climax. He woke her up around 8 p.m., just banging on the door, ringing the bell incessantly.
When she called the police again?
Called the police, yeah. He fled before they arrived. And again, nothing concrete happened to actually stop him right then and there. The sources say she filed over 7 separate police reports in total leading up to the shooting.
7 reports. And after he found her new address, the emails got even worse.
Horrific. Demanding she meet him or else she'd wake up to gunshots. And these vile, sickening threats of sexual violence involving her boyfriend's blood. I mean, it's stomach-churning stuff.
You can only imagine the toll this took on her.
Immense. Her own accounts describe developing severe insomnia, crippling depression, constant anxiety, paranoia. She became incredibly isolated.
Lost friends.
Yeah, lost friends who maybe didn't get it or couldn't handle the danger she was constantly in. She faced eviction again, lost a job because his harassment spilled over into her professional life. It just consumed everything.
And she talked about how the word stalking feels almost trivialized sometimes, like people use it lightly and don't grasp the reality in severe cases like hers.
Exactly, that the word itself doesn't capture the sheer terror and destruction it causes when it's this relentless, this real.
In her interactions with law enforcement, you mentioned the reports, but the response.
Yeah, that's a really crucial and frankly frustrating part of the story based on the sources and her later accounts. Despite all this mounting evidence, the constant threats, him showing up physically, multiple police reports.
The response was often.
According to her, it was often something like, well, we can't really do much because technically at this point he hasn't done anything illegal right in front of us, or he hasn't actually hurt you yet.
Hasn't hurt you yet. That's the threshold.
That seems to be what she experienced. In her later TikTok accounts, she recalled filing, 5, 10 times, making like 10 police reports, and just repeatedly hitting that wall, being told they couldn't act preemptively.
And there's that detail about the detective assigned to her case.
Yeah.
That's particularly disturbing.
Yeah, really disturbing. From her later account, she says this detective actually met the stalker and then told her, the victim, that this stalker seemed like a nice guy.
A nice guy. Seriously.
And even suggested it could all just be a misunderstanding.
A misunderstanding with death threats. With him showing up at her door, how is that possible?
It highlights this massive disconnect, doesn't it? It's a key frustrating point that comes up in the sources and commentary. It really makes you question the training, the perspective, how law enforcement recognizes escalating danger in these situations.
And there was potentially another layer to this too, right? Something the victim mentioned later.
Yes. It's important to include this. In her later account, the victim stated that the stalker himself allegedly threatened her, saying he would get away with it because he was a white man and she was a black woman.
So he allegedly weaponized race in his threats.
That's what she reported him saying. The sources present this as his alleged comment, but it adds this deeply disturbing potential dynamic to her experience and possibly her perception of why the system seemed unresponsive.
Yeah. And her whole experience, plus the commentary around the case online, it really taps into this broader societal frustration, doesn't it?
Definitely. You see it in the comments. The sheer difficulty victims face getting police and prosecutors to take these threats seriously before someone gets physically hurt, especially if you don't have money for a lawyer to really push things.
Right. The feeling that society often just doesn't treat threats seriously until it's too late. That unhelpful, just move advice, which clearly didn't work here.
And that harsh legal reality referenced in commentaries stemming from cases like Castle Rock v. Gonzalez that basically says police don't have a specific legal duty to protect any one individual person from harm.
Which leaves victims feeling completely abandoned.
Utterly abandoned and terrified. All of this created this environment of just unbearable fear for her. The system wasn't protecting her.
And that desperation, it pushed her to prepare for the absolute worst, didn't it?
It did. The sources describe her taking extreme measures, sleeping with a chair wedged under her doorknob just to buy maybe a few extra seconds if he broke in.
Just a few seconds.
And crucially, despite being anti-gun, she had past family trauma related to firearms. She made the incredibly difficult decision to get a gun for self-defense.
She felt she had no other option.
None. She even carried it with her while showering. That's the level of fear she was living with. She felt the system had failed, and she was the only one left who could potentially save her own life. She was anticipating violence.
Which brings us to that night. The night everything changed. It was a Sunday morning.
According to the updates, yeah. Around 1:15 a.m., she was asleep and was woken up by the sound. The sound of her door giving way. He kicked it in.
Just one kick.
One forceful kick, apparently. Describe that moment. That shift from sleep to sheer terror to action.
It must have been instantaneous.
She described those seconds. Hearing the wood splintering, hearing him immediately struggling with the chair she'd put there, that jolt awake, jumping up, grabbing the gun she kept close by.
And then what? She confronted him.
She was at the top of her stairs. He was presumably at the bottom, having just broken in, and she fired twice.
She hit him.
Hit him in the chest. She described hearing his scream. A sound she said was filled with disbelief. Like he couldn't believe she'd actually fought back like that.
In her own state?
She said her own emotional state just flipped. 0 to 100 in milliseconds, she put it. Pure survival instinct kicking in over the terror.
What happened right after the shots? Chaos.
Pretty much. Her account captures the intensity, still immense fear, obviously. She called 911 immediately. The police arrived quickly.
And the stalker?
He'd fled the apartment after being shot, but didn't get far. They brought in police dogs, the canine unit. They found him hiding under a bush nearby.
Hiding under a bush. Wow. And her reaction when they found him?
Complex. She described it as a haze of guilt, surprise, relief, and disbelief, shaking uncontrollably as they located him. But underneath all that, this profound realization washed over her. She said she thought, I survived where so many people do not. Holy shit, I survived.
That feeling must have been overwhelming. Relief mixed with trauma.
Absolutely. And the news reports later confirmed the basic facts, right?
Yes. The intruder was identified as Douglas Eugene Jackson, 22 years old at the time. Confirmed he kicked in the door, was found by the police dogs, taken for medical treatment for his injuries.
And he faced charges.
He faced home invasion and aggravated stalking charges. But it's really important to note, as you mentioned, how even the news reports often framed it, calling him a former boyfriend.
After just 2 dates.
Yeah. And that framing, as many people pointed out in commentary, really minimizes the reality. It wasn't a relationship dispute. It was stalking.
Yeah.
Pure, terrifying, unwanted obsession.
But that language really matters, doesn't it? It shapes public perception. It feeds into those problematic victim-blaming narratives that imply, oh, it was just a messy breakup or something.
Instead of recognizing it as a violent crime perpetrated by a stranger, essentially.
Exactly.
Now, in the aftermath, there was also some discussion online, commentary about her actions. Specifically, people questioning why she didn't fire a warning shot. How did she and others sort of chiming in from a self-defense perspective address that?
Yeah, that came up. Both her own defense of her actions and the opinions reflected in the commentary from people with, say, firearms training were very clear and consistent on this point.
This was.
A gun is deadly force, period. You only use it when you are in reasonable fear for your life or serious bodily harm, and other options are gone or ineffective. Warning shots are considered incredibly dangerous and irresponsible.
Why is that?
Well, several reasons came up. 1, they don't guarantee the attacker will start. 2, you have no idea where that bullet is going to end up with. You could hit an innocent person in another room or even another building. 3, it gives away your position and tells the attacker you're armed, potentially escalating things or giving them a chance to react violently. Responsible gun ownership, the consensus was, means you only point the gun at something you intend to shoot, and you only shoot to stop an immediate deadly threat.
And that means aiming to stop the threat, right? Not to wound, not to warn.
Exactly. Aiming for center mass to neutralize the threat as quickly as possible. Commentary from folks familiar with concealed carry training really emphasized this. You don't draw your weapon unless you are fully prepared and legally justified to use lethal force right then. Things happen too fast. Warning shots are largely a myth of movies and TV, not a safe or practical reality in a life or death situation.
Okay, that makes sense. A very stark reality check. Now, tragically, as you alluded to, this story, it doesn't end there with the shooting and his arrest in 2014.
No, it takes another really disturbing turn years later. Fast forward to 2020, that's 6 years after the original event. And this significant and frankly really frustrating update emerged from the sources.
What happened?
Douglas Eugene Jackson, now 28 years old, was sentenced to 15 years in prison.
Okay, for the original crime?
No, for stalking a different woman in 2019.
He stalked someone else while he was on parole for the first stalking case.
Exactly. That's the truly shocking part, and it caused a lot of outrage in the commentary online. He committed this new stalking crime while he was on parole from the 2014 aggravated stalking case, the one where Deja, the victim, had to shoot him.
How long was he even in prison for the first time?
Sources pointed to Nevada prison records showing he served about 5 years, from roughly September 2014 to September 2019. Then he was paroled.
And he reoffended almost immediately after getting out.
According to the reports on the second case, yes. It seems he started stalking the new victim only about a month after being released on parole.
A month. Unbelievable. Were his methods similar?
Disturbingly similar in some ways. His actions against the second victim included sending numerous threatening text messages, making threats against her dog and her property, and contacting her family and friends trying to get information about her. Echoes of the first case.
So being shot, going to prison for 5 years, it didn't deter him at all.
Yeah.
Apparently not. This update sparked so much commentary questioning the whole justice and parole system. People asking how could he possibly be deemed fit for parole? It seemed like clear evidence he hadn't changed, hadn't been rehabilitated. It just highlighted this terrifying cyclical nature of his obsessive behavior. The thought that even being shot didn't stop him. That's deeply unsettling.
And then, even more recently, in 2023, 9 years after the original shooting, the victim herself came forward publicly, right?
Yes. Deja Washington. She went on platforms like TikTok, confirming she was indeed the original Reddit poster. She shared her story in her own words, reaffirming the details we've discussed. The stalking, the shooting, adding her voice directly to the narrative after all those years.
What did she say about the impact on her life, looking back?
She talked about how it profoundly and permanently changed her, but also how she's tried to use that horrific experience to help others. She worked at a gun range for a time, taught refused to be a victim courses, focusing on empowering people, especially women, to protect themselves.
Turning trauma into advocacy.
In a way, yeah. She mentioned she now works at a big tech company, and she talks about never taking life for granted. But she's also very clear that her fundamental sense of safety, that feeling of being secure in the world, that's been permanently altered, it never really goes away.
I can't imagine it would. So if we connect all these dots now, looking across everything, the initial post, the news, the system's response, his reoffending, her own voice later.
Yeah.
What are the really key themes or takeaways from this whole case?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's the overwhelming difficulty victims face. Getting law enforcement, getting the whole system to take stalking seriously before it escalates to outright violence or home invasion.
The bar seems way too high.
It really does. As her experience and all the commentary pointed out, the threshold for meaningful intervention often seems dangerously high. You shouldn't have to wait until you're physically attacked.
It also shines a harsh light on those systemic issues within policing and the justice system, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Things like police discretion, that detective calling him a nice guy, potential biases influencing how cases are perceived or handled, and serious questions about the effectiveness of the parole system, especially when dealing with individuals who show this kind of relentless, dangerous, obsessive behavior. How do you assess risk accurately?
And the media's role, that framing issue.
Yeah, the problematic media framing is a definite takeaway. Calling him a former boyfriend after just 2 dates minimizes the crime and feeds into those victim-blaming narratives we talked about. It shifts focus away from his actions.
It also gives a very stark picture of self-defense, doesn't it? The reality versus the myths.
Totally. Her actions and the discussions around them really underscore that using a firearm in self-defense isn't like in the movies. It's a last resort, a decision about using deadly force when you genuinely believe your life is in immediate danger and everything else has failed. No warning shots, just stopping the threat.
And finally, the sheer human cost, the psychological toll.
Undeniable. The severe psychological and social impact on victims like Deja, the isolation, the constant fear, the paranoia, losing your job, your home, your friends, and that permanent shattering of your sense of safety, it changes you forever.
The commentary in the sources also touched a bit on the stalker psychology, right? Trying to understand this kind of behavior.
Yeah, there was some discussion around concepts like magical thinking, this belief stalkers sometimes have that their victim secretly wants them despite all evidence, behavioral addiction where the stalking itself becomes compulsive, and the really difficult, chilling idea that for some individuals with this level of extreme obsession, maybe the only things that will truly stop them are long-term incarceration or worse.
Was there any talk about potential solutions? systemically.
Well, there was brief mention in some of the commentary around the idea of a stalking or domestic abuse registry, kind of like sex offender registries, as a possible tool to maybe better track offenders and warn potential future victims. But that's a really complex idea with lots of debate around privacy and effectiveness.
So this whole deep dive, it's taken us from this horrifying start, a story born from a viral online post, through the system just struggling to keep up, culminating in this violent confrontation where she had to fight for her own life.
And then into the long aftermath. For her, living with the trauma, but also finding strength. For him, tragically, repeating the pattern, showing the cyclical nature of this behavior and the limitations of the system trying to contain it.
It really serves as such a stark, terrifying, real-world example of that phrase she heard. A restraining order is just a piece of paper.
Yeah, it chillingly illustrates what can happen when that proves to be true, and when the systems we rely on for protection ultimately fail the person who needs them most.
So it really leaves us, and you listening, with a powerful and honestly quite difficult question to think about. In these cases of persistent escalating stalking, how can the systems actually designed to protect us be made genuinely effective before it reaches that life or death moment? And maybe what responsibility do we all have individually and collectively when the system does fail and people are left with no other choice but to defend themselves?
All right, moving on to the next story. Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a really challenging, very personal situation today, pulling from a stack of posts and updates you shared online.
That's right. Our source material is essentially a narrative shared by a man, the original poster, or OP, walking us through the painful breakdown of his marriage and, well, the path that eventually led to divorce.
And our mission in this deep dive is to really get inside this specific story as it was shared. We want to follow his perspective, understand the dynamics he lays out, trace the progression of events, and sort of identify those key turning points he highlighted. What can we learn from this particular journey, drawing only from the material you provided?
Absolutely. And it's not just the initial toast, right? We have multiple updates from him, plus the sheer volume of reactions and comments his story generated. That adds so many layers of perspective that are really insightful when we look at the bigger picture he presented.
So, starting at the beginning then, let's set the scene described in that first post. We meet a man, 43 years old, his wife, 38, and their two young kids, 3 and 5 years old.
And from his point of view, he's really been the primary provider, putting in immense effort over the years. He talks about working multiple jobs, getting multiple degrees, 2 bachelors, and a master's in a demanding STEM field.
Right, and he explicitly stated this was all to improve their financial standing,
Exactly. And he also mentions he put his wife through school as well. She got a degree in a healthcare field with what he describes as pretty good earning potential, like around $60,000 to $70,000 a year with jobs available.
But she became a stay-at-home mom after the kids were born.
That's the situation he describes. Their current finances, based on his single income, he says, are comfortable, slightly north of $150,000 base plus bonuses. And his work is mostly remote, 75% from home, then shifting to 100% WFH for a period during this story.
He also outlines a support system that was apparently in place. They had a daytime nanny Monday through Friday.
Yeah, helping with one child while the other was at school, he said.
And his mother-in-law, the MIL, was actually living with them and also providing help. So quite a bit of support there.
It sounds like it. And it's against this backdrop that we see the first major point of friction, at least from his perspective. He contrasts his demanding work schedule, early starts, managing global teams, with how he perceived his wife's daily routine.
What did he say about that?
He observed her day often starting around 10 a.m., spending a lot of time on her phone, and doing online shopping after the morning meal prep. That was his perception.
Right, okay. And then he piles on this extensive list of responsibilities he handles outside of his demanding job. He's managing all the finances, all the bills, household, personal, even bills specifically for his wife, he claims.
Wow.
He's tracking and doing upkeep for the house, the cars, the pets, and he even contributes financially to his MIL's medical bills and her car note. It's a lot.
It definitely paints a picture of him carrying a significant load, not just financially and professionally, but domestically and administratively too. And the core marital conflict he describes seems to stem from this perceived imbalance and a deep emotional disconnect.
Yeah, he feels his wife constantly diminishes his stress, almost like she's competitive about hardship. One-upping him was the phrase he used.
Yes, that phrase comes up multiple times in his posts. And paired with that is a recurring accusation from her, according to him, that he ruined her life and her opportunities by marrying her and having kids, essentially.
And when he tries to talk about these feelings or issues,
he says she denies it or completely dodges accountability, just won't engage with it, basically.
Emotionally, he describes feeling completely disconnected, like they're just roommates. He said he was in emotional survival mode.
Yeah, finding himself talking to his dogs more than his wife, needing basic emotional connection like a hug that he says he just wasn't receiving. It sounds incredibly lonely.
It's a pretty bleak picture of his internal state, yeah, even with a comfortable external life. And he mentions his MIL, who is living there, has noticed changes in both of them, which adds another layer of perspective.
He provided a lot of additional context as well, trying to be thorough. He clarified there was absolutely no cheating on his part. He works in an industry with many women, but insisted he was transparent.
Like his work calendar and stuff were open?
Yeah, accessible, though he noted she didn't really seem to know or maybe care what he actually did for work.
He also mentioned that attempts were made by both their families to get his wife into therapy.
But she refused, or just avoided it, according to him. He also talked about their different family backgrounds. Her parents reportedly had a monogamous marriage, which contrasts with his own difficult upbringing in a single-mother household, although his biological father was apparently present in his life.
And the intimacy that was gone.
Pretty much non-existent, he said. He speculated this could be linked to her potential depression, maybe, or even his own self-perception about his looks or health conditions, though he was clear he remained faithful out of love for his wife.
He did make a point, though, to be fair, to list what his wife did contribute domestically.
Right. What were those things?
She cooked meals and snacks for everyone in the house, including the MIL and the nanny. She loaded laundry for herself and the kids.
Though he noted she seldom folded or put it away, he said he handled his own dry cleaning anyway.
And she tracked pantry and fridge needs, but he was the one actually buying the groceries and cleaning. About 50% hers, he estimated, with the MIL himself or the nanny covering the rest.
Okay, so she was doing some things around the house.
Yes, but something significant he highlighted was her history of scoring quite high on postpartum depression screening forms after both children, especially the second one.
That's a really important piece of context.
It is. And he states her refusal to seek therapy after these results was a major reason he hesitated to, give up on the marriage earlier.
That makes sense. Holding out hope, maybe thinking it could get better with treatment.
Exactly. But despite that hesitation, despite the hope, he revealed that he had already started quietly preparing for the end.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
How so?
He'd consulted 3 different lawyers, had a draft settlement ready, knew his rights apparently, and was planning for potential court battles. He said he was willing to offer more than fair for the kids' sake.
So he was living this double life almost, suffering in silence but planning an exit.
Pretty much. He admits he was suffering partly to maintain normalcy for the kids, ensure his MIL's medical treatments weren't disrupted, and that lingering hope that things might somehow change.
So that sets the stage for the first big turning point in the story as he told it.
Which was his decision to actually show his wife the original Reddit post and all the comments that flooded in. Pretty bold move.
Definitely bold. He did this the weekend after he initially posted. And the immediate aftermath, well, it was an argument, and she left the house to stay with her sister.
Right. And while she was gone, which was a little over a week, his experience was basically becoming the sole active parent.
How did he describe that time?
He noted the daily routine for the kids stayed largely the same, just maybe with more takeout food. Communication with her was minimal, mostly just goodnight texts for the children.
And he reflected on this period, didn't he? Acknowledging how kind of sad it felt that he'd reached a point where he had to spill his guts to random internet strangers just to feel seen or validated.
Yeah, that reliance on external validation really seemed to hit him as a low point.
So after that week or so away, his wife attempted to return home.
And her initial plan, according to him, was to take the children with her.
But he was firmly against it. And interestingly, her own family, including the sister she'd been staying with, also opposed her taking the kids.
Why was that?
They reportedly felt it was unfair to the children and would put too much financial and housing stress on the family, given her lack of income at the time.
So faced with that pushback, she came back alone.
Yeah, after about a week and a half total, she came back. And the way he described it was she just walked in the door with her bags as if she just came back from Target.
Wow, just like that. No discussion.
Apparently not initially. But the confrontation followed pretty swiftly and dramatically. She went into his office while he was on a conference call.
Oh, no.
And started yelling, accusing him of not caring about her well-being. The MIL had to intervene, pull her away, and the nanny kept the children separate from the whole scene.
That sounds incredibly stressful. What happened after that?
Later that night, after the kids were asleep, they ended up having this long emotional conversation, talking, arguing, crying, drinking, and eventually they were intimate.
So maybe a breakthrough, or...
You'd think, maybe. But the conversation the very next morning sounded absolutely heartbreaking, maybe even more telling than the fight.
How so?
She focused entirely on her own difficulties while she was away, comparing everyone else's lives in the family, including his, which he saw as incredibly demanding as easy compared to hers. This, despite him pointing out they had similar upbringings.
Did he share any specifics of that conversation?
He did. He shared a quote that really seems to cut to the core of their dynamic, from his view. She apparently told him he was supposed to help me be happy.
Okay. And his response?
He asked if his own well-being was just irrelevant, essentially. So what about me? Am I just supposed to figure it out and get over it?
And her response to that?
He says her response was basically, yes, he needs to figure it out and get over them himself. His problems were his to solve alone, apparently.
Oof. That's harsh.
Hearing that, he said he felt like he didn't even recognize the woman she'd become. He became noticeably distant after that, started sleeping separately in his office, on the couch, sometimes even with the kids in their rooms.
And did her behavior change at all after coming back? Her daily routine?
He observed that her routine, starting the day late, being on her phone a lot, hadn't changed one bit, despite the drama and the intense conversations.
So at this point in the story, he's feeling pretty hopeless, right?
Yeah, very much so. He felt like nothing was going to change. His primary fear was still the impact of divorce on the kids, maybe losing them in a custody battle.
Yeah.
But he also admitted that their current dynamic was so distant, divorce might not even feel that different for him personally.
He reaffirmed his reasons for staying as long as he did, though. The kids' stability, supporting his MIL's treatments, that tiny flicker of hope.
Right. He knew suffering in silence was unhealthy, but felt it was perhaps preferable to a really bitter, drawn-out divorce fight that could damage the children more. And he kept those legal preparations and backup plans ready, just in case.
Which brings us to what he describes as the climax of the story and his final decision to file for divorce. It sounds like things escalated further.
They did. He mentioned a family intervention was attempted, which actually led to them finally going to a marriage counseling session together.
Finally. Did that help at all?
Based on his account, not really. He narrated the outcome as being filled with blame, tears, regrets, and what he perceived as gaslighting. And crucially, he said his wife repeated the accusation that he had ruined her life, this time directly to the therapist.
In front of the therapist, wow.
Yeah, and he noted she pretty much dismissed the therapist's suggestions throughout the session.
Did anything specific stand out from that session?
He highlighted one moment. The therapist asked his wife when she last felt truly happy. Her answer: around 12 years ago, before they had children, living with an ex in a completely different phase of her life.
Oh, well, that's telling.
He thought so too. OP observed that it wasn't a huge leap to think she might be subconsciously yearning for or trying to recreate that past childless life.
Okay, so counseling didn't fix things. Then came the incident he described as the real pivotal moment, right? The Father's Day BBQ.
Exactly. He said his wife largely detached herself from the family gathering, treated it like any other day, sat separately while everyone else was enjoying the family time.
And the breaking point.
It occurred when she overheard him talking to someone else about seeing some kids sitting alone without their dads at a recent school event he'd attended. Loud enough for everyone to hear, she apparently laughed and said, "It's not like you do anything anyway. I could have gone instead."
Whoa. In front of everyone.
That's how he described it. He said a stunned silence fell over the whole gathering. And it was actually his MIL who broke it.
What did she say?
She directly addressed the wife, saying, "Well, maybe if you feel that way, one of you should divorce the other."
Wow, her own mother.
Yeah. And his wife's reaction to that, as he tells it, was initial confusion, then mocking laughter directed straight at him. She pointed at him and said something like, "As if another woman would want a man like him. Just look at you."
Oh my God. That's brutal. Publicly humiliating.
Absolutely. He described feeling a mix of just anger, heartbreak, confusion, and deep embarrassment. He didn't say anything back. He just nodded silently, stood up, and left to get a drink, even though his family and the kids were apparently crying out for him to stay.
I can't even imagine. That must have been the final straw.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
That night, the decision solidified. The next morning, he saw her sleeping, reflected on everything, and just knew he was done. He texted his lawyer that morning, "Serve her."
Just like that. And when the papers were served,
he described her having a mini meltdown. She came into his office screaming, accusing him of turning her whole family against her.
Did her behavior change then? Any attempt to fix things?
He noted there was a temporary attempt from her after being served, acting like a more attentive wife and mother for a bit. But based on their history, he didn't believe for a second it would last.
So what were his plans moving forward with the divorce?
He stated his plan was to seek full or majority custody of the children. He was already covering and intended to continue covering all their expenses, private school, insurance, medical bills, everything.
And the MIL? What was her role in all this, beside that BBQ comment?
He really emphasized her significant role throughout, saying she provided courage and support. He stated his firm intention to continue contributing financially to her medical treatments out of respect and because cancer had impacted his own family, so we understood.
That's quite something, supporting the MIL through a divorce from her daughter. What about alimony?
Legally, he mentioned his state doesn't typically enforce alimony, especially since his wife has the means and training to work in her healthcare field. He did offer to cover her insurance and bills temporarily until the divorce was finalized or she got a job.
So he was prepared for a fight but wanted it clean.
That seems to be the goal, yeah. A clean break focused on the kids.
Okay, so moving beyond the step-by-step narrative he provided, looking through the comments section of these posts reveals some really powerful, broader themes and reflections that jumped out at people.
Definitely. One of the most striking things people discussed was the MIL's actions and the perceived support she offered OP. Many found it remarkable, almost challenging traditional ideas of family loyalty,
Right, that she seemed to prioritize the well-being and reality of the household, maybe what she saw day to day, over simply defending her daughter no matter what, especially since she lived there.
Exactly. It's a dynamic that often gets overlooked in these family breakdowns, and it really resonated in the comments.
Absolutely. And building on that, there was so much discussion around the whole idea of staying together for the kids.
Yeah. What was the consensus there?
The core takeaway echoed by so many commenters, drawing on their own experiences sometimes, is that stability isn't just about parents sharing a roof. The quality of that home environment is crucial.
You mean a home filled with conflict or resentment might be worse?
Precisely. A home steeped in conflict, resentment, or contempt, like the one described here, can be far more emotionally unstable and damaging for children than two separate, calmer homes.
Someone even used a really vivid metaphor, didn't they? Contrasting taking a bullet for the kids by staying in a toxic situation.
With the idea of getting them someplace when no one's shooting. Yeah, that one hit hard for a lot of people in the comments.
It really puts it in perspective. And while it's crucial, obviously, not to diagnose from afar, and these are just suspicions raised in the source material itself or the comments.
Right, we need to be careful there.
The community's speculation about potential underlying issues like PPD, maybe OCD, ADHD, or even things like narcissism or a victim mentality, it highlights a common struggle in these situations. Just trying to understand behavior that feels inexplicable or irrational to the person experiencing it.
And the sources themselves, the OP's posts, point out the wife's reported refusal to seek professional help, right? Even after clear indicators like those high PPD screening scores were noted.
Exactly. The impact of that refusal, regardless of the specific underlying cause, is clearly highlighted in his narrative as a major factor in the marriage's inability to heal or improve.
Many commenters also honed in on what they perceived as the wife's lack of self-awareness, maybe a sense of entitlement, or a loss of perspective on her situation versus his.
Was there speculation on why that might be?
Some commenters wondered if it could be exacerbated by social media echo chambers or certain online mom groups that might, maybe inadvertently, promote a sense of martyrdom or an overly negative generalized view of partners or dads.
That's an interesting modern angle.
Yeah.
There was also a strong current of comments just highlighting the husband's extensive efforts across the board. His work, education, managing all the finances, household upkeep, contributing to the MIL.
And questioning what the wife was truly contributing to the partnership beyond those basic domestic tasks he listed, especially given the significant support system already in place with the nanny and the ML.
It raises questions about balance in the relationship, for sure. And tying into the potential custody fight, the discussion included speculation, again, just speculation from commenters, that the wife might fight hard for the children, not necessarily because she wanted the full burden of care.
but possibly out of spite, or maybe a desire to avoid being perceived publicly as a lesser parent. It's a difficult dynamic, but one that gets raised often in these online divorce discussions.
Yeah, the performative aspect of parenting sometimes. And remember the husband's mention of the "you get to go to work" comparison.
Oh, yeah, that struck a chord with many commenters, too.
It seemed to highlight that potential underlying resentment some stay-at-home parents might feel about their partner having an external life that escaped to the office, regardless of how demanding the partner's job actually is. It's that complex dynamic of feeling stuck versus having perceived freedom.
Definitely a common friction point. And just on a note of, I guess, dark humor that popped up in the comments, many people really picked up on OP's very succinct update after the papers were delivered.
Which one was that?
She got served. She mad. That simple, almost blunt phrasing became a sort of catchphrase in the threads, kind of encapsulating the abrupt shift after years of him suffering in silence.
It's memorable, I'll give it that.
Yeah.
And finally, perhaps one of the most frequently cited relationship killers discussed in the comments, which seemed powerfully evident in that Father's Day incident.
It was the contempt, right?
Exactly. The perceived contempt shown by the wife. That level of public disdain directed at a partner is seen by so many relationship experts and commenters alike as incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible, to come back from. It just erodes everything.
So this story, as it was shared through these posts and updates, really takes us through a deeply difficult journey. Years of one person feeling like they were trying alone, the immense emotional toll it took, the failed attempts at repair, and then that eventual painful but seemingly necessary decision to end the marriage.
It really highlights the complex interplay of individual struggles, whatever they might be, the dynamics within the relationship itself, and how external factors like family support or the lack thereof can weigh so heavily on these profound breakdowns. It's a real window into the immense personal challenges people face when communication just completely fails and underlying issues go unaddressed for too long.
And it really underscores just how agonizing it can be to make these fundamental life changes, like ending a marriage, when young children and other family members, like the MIL in this case, are so intricately involved. The ripple effects are huge.
Absolutely. So considering all the perspectives shared in this deep dive, drawing directly from the source material provided, it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? What are the true long-term consequences for both the adults involved and especially their children of prioritizing a perceived sense of stability or just keeping up appearances over the fundamental emotional and psychological well-being of everyone within the home?
Yeah. What does it truly mean to take a bullet for your kids in a situation like the one described here? And when does that strategy cross the line and actually start causing more harm than good? Something to really sit with. All right, moving on to the next story. This deep dive is going to be intense.
And it gets intense right from the start. The scene the original poster, or OOP, sets, he's 36, seems to be in a good relationship, like over a year and a half.
With his 29-year-old girlfriend. And he talks about bonding with her son, who's 7, building a little friendship, he called it.
They were even starting to talk about moving in together. Things seemed positive.
He also mentioned something important. The son's biological dad was apparently in and out of prison.
Okay.
So OOP felt like he was becoming, a consistent, positive male figure for the boy.
Which just makes what happens next even more shocking.
Totally. The core event that just blew everything up, a sudden, life-altering false accusation made by the 7-year-old son.
And the consequences weren't gradual. They were immediate. Devastating.
Absolutely instant. He describes the police turning up. Not at his house?
No.
At his office. Can you even imagine that?
Wow.
Being arrested, put in handcuffs, walked out right in front of all his colleagues.
That public nature of it. That's huge. At work.
It's critical. It wasn't just private legal trouble. It was instant public shaming before anyone knew any facts.
And that's a key point right there, isn't it? How fast institutions react, often just to the allegation.
And how that immediately hits your reputation, your job, long before guilt or innocence is sorted out.
So after the arrest, he spends 12 hours, he said, in a police cell. Traumatic hours, multiple interviews.
Then he gets released on bail, but with this really strict condition, absolutely no contact with the girlfriend or her son. Very isolating.
And the fallout didn't stop there. The professional side hit him just as fast.
Instantly. Placed on gardening leave. This was a job he'd had for over 5 years.
A good job, too. Good salary, perks like a car, phone.
Yeah. And his immediate thought, his fear, was that he was going to get fired. And how would he ever find work in his field again with this hanging over him?
Think about that pressure. years building a career, and it feels like it's just collapsing overnight because of an accusation.
An accusation that turned out to be false.
Right. And on top of that, the social side started crumbling too. Colleagues, people he thought were friends.
Taking him off social media, ghosting him, just like that.
That ripple effect. It just kept spreading outwards.
And it wasn't just external stuff happening to him. He talks about the toll on his health.
Yeah, physical and mental.
Not sleeping, losing weight, having frequent anxiety attacks. It hit him hard internally right away.
It shows how a crisis like this can just consume every single part of your life.
So he's stuck in this absolute nightmare. Legal limbo, job on the line, friends disappearing, health suffering.
And then the story shifts towards the truth.
But a truth that's maybe even more painful, more complicated than the lie itself.
He gets a letter. Police. Case dropped. That's it.
No explanation in the letter.
No. He had to actually call the policeman he dealt with.
Okay.
And that's when he finds out. The officer tells him the son confessed. The 7-year-old admitted he'd made it all up. OOP was innocent.
Finally confirmed. But why? Why did the boy lie?
And this is where it gets just incredibly tragic. It reveals this deeper layer of trauma.
Right.
According to the son's confession, and what the girlfriend later explained,
Yeah.
the 7-year-old had actually been molested by the girlfriend's 12-year-old nephew at a party just days before the accusation against OP.
So when the police questioned the son,
He panicked. He was traumatized, scared. And instead of naming his cousin the actual abuser,
he blamed OP.
the person he probably felt safe blaming, in a twisted way. Someone who wouldn't retaliate like the abuser might.
That's devastating, and the trauma just keeps echoing, doesn't it?
It does, because the nephew, the 12-year-old, he later confessed too.
And what did he say?
He apparently said he was just doing what happened to him.
Oh, wow. Implying he was also a victim.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Suggesting this cycle of abuse might go even deeper in the family. Just awful.
So when OP learns all this, the abuse, the lie, the reason why the kid lied, what was his reaction?
Pure disgust. That's the word he used. He just hung up the phone on the girlfriend.
Didn't want to hear anymore.
No. Deleted all his social media.
Yeah.
Just wanted to cut ties completely. He said he felt mad, shocked, confused, but mostly just disgusted.
Understandable. He probably just wanted to walk away, ghost her completely.
He considered it, but she didn't let that happen. She started calling, texting, emailing, trying to get through to him.
Which brings us to that whole pushback phase and the really different ways people reacted in the Reddit comments.
Yeah, the girlfriend's reaction, as he described it. Lots of apologies.
But qualified apologies.
Kind of. She kept saying she had to report it as a mother. Which, okay, many commenters agreed with that initial step.
That duty of care.
But she also said, looking back, she knew he wasn't capable of it. And then she wanted to get back together.
After all that. Seriously.
Yeah. Even suggested this whole nightmare could somehow make them stronger. She mentioned the son missed him, was crying about hurting OOP.
Wow. That's a lot to process. And how did the Reddit comments react to that?
It got really complex. One major thread was pushing for compassion for the 7-year-old.
Focusing on his trauma.
Right. Arguing he wasn't malicious, just terrified. That he blamed OP, the safe person, because he was so scared of his cousin, the real abuser.
So they were saying OP should forgive him and not abandon him.
Some suggested that, yeah, maybe write the kid a letter, help him process, don't just ghost him.
But how did OP respond to that? Because he was the one whose life got turned upside down.
And that's exactly the counterpoint he made, very powerfully. He said intellectually, he could sort of get the child's psychology, the trauma response.
But emotionally?
Emotionally, he just couldn't, not right then. Because the cost to him was so enormous, potentially life-ruining.
He laid it all out, didn't he? Losing the job, career prospects, maybe his home, friends, his health.
The relationship itself with the woman he thought he might marry. He detailed all that damage.
Highlighting that huge difference. The child was a victim of abuse who lied out of fear. OP was the victim of that lie, suffering massive, concrete harm.
Exactly. He used the phrase, gets it in my rational brain, but couldn't overcome the pain and resentment right now.
And he also talked about the sadness of losing that bond with the kid, right? Especially since he couldn't have biological kids.
Yeah, that added another layer of poignancy. He started to feel real affection, good things towards him, he said. Losing that hurt too.
So the source really lays out this incredibly difficult conflict. You've got two victims with competing needs, competing traumas.
The child victim who lied because of his own abuse, and the adult victim of that lie who faced catastrophic consequences.
And their paths to healing, or what others expected of them, seemed to be pulling in opposite directions.
That tension was right at the heart of the whole discussion online. Really tough stuff.
Absolutely. Just navigating that must have been impossible. Okay, so moving on slightly. He's also trying to get some closure, deal with the job situation.
He did end up meeting the girlfriend again. It sounds like he answered a withheld number while he was drunk and agreed to see her.
Oh boy. How did that go?
He said he went in planning to be angry, but as soon as he saw her, he just broke down.
The emotion just overwhelmed him.
Yeah. And she apparently noticed how much it had taken out of him. Said he looked awful, lost weight. It shows how deep the stress went.
Did she apologize again?
Profusely, he said. But again, kind of reiterating her perspective, had to report it as a mum, but knew deep down he couldn't have done it.
And then she told him the full story about the nephew.
Yes. Including that chilling detail, the nephew said, only doing what happened to him.
And OP's reaction to that?
Visceral. He said he couldn't give a fuck about the nephew's reasons at that moment. He was just focused on his own pain.
And he mentioned she seemed surprised by his anger.
Yeah, which kind of suggests maybe she wasn't fully getting the sheer scale of the damage she'd suffered.
The conversation didn't go well then.
It escalated. She pushed about their future, said she loved him, and then she gave him a letter from the son.
How did he react to the letter?
Angrily at first. Refused to read it right then.
Yeah.
Brought up his ruined career again.
Which led to her getting upset.
Yeah, she got pissed. Asked if their relationship meant so little. It ended with him taking the letter, but no promises.
Just raw emotion on both sides, but pointing in different directions.
Definitely. They hugged and kissed goodbye. She acknowledged feeling bad about his job, but they were clearly not on the same page at all.
And meanwhile, he's also dealing with work.
Right. He described a meeting where colleagues treated him badly. Mentioned his work mom snubbing him. He was expecting to get fired.
That mud sticks thing playing out right there in the office.
Exactly. Even though he was cleared, the accusation just lingered. But he was ready to negotiate.
What was the first offer they made?
Resignation, not firing. With a great reference, pay for Siptacht, and a 1,000-pound car bonus.
Better than being sacked, but still.
Still felt deeply unfair. He expressed sadness about having to resign after 5 years of hard work just because of a false accusation, doing nothing wrong.
But he didn't just accept that, did he? He pushed back.
No, he decided that wasn't enough. This is where he starts taking control, making the final breaks.
What'd he do?
He messaged his managing director, directly someone he had a decent relationship with.
And
basically threatened legal action. Mentioned he had an employment law specialist lined up.
Playing hardball.
Yeah.
Showing he wouldn't just roll over.
Exactly. A strategic move. And it worked.
Led to another meeting.
Yep, the second meeting. This time the MD was there, claiming he'd been kept out of the loop before.
Convenient.
Right. Said the regional bosses in HR looked pretty sheepish.
So what was the new offer?
Much better. Full pay for 5 months plus the current month. 3,000-pound car settlement, his usual 5% salary bonus, and a glowing personal reference.
That's a significant improvement.
Definitely. And his reason for accepting it then, he just wanted it to be over.
Didn't want the stress and time of a tribunal fight.
Exactly. Chose peace of mind, closure, over potentially getting more money but dragging it out.
Makes sense. And during all this, did he read the son's letter?
He did. He described it as brief, child's writing, due his name. I'm sorry, I love you. You're my best friend.
Oh, man. That's tough.
Yeah. He said he tried to stay detached, but the simplicity, the raw emotion, it clearly got to him. Shows that connection was real, however damaged.
Did he reply?
He decided to, yeah. But not through the girlfriend. He sent a note back via post directly to the son.
What did he say? Do we know?
He shared the gist. He apologized for what happened to the son, meaning the abuse by the nephew.
Acknowledging the boy's trauma.
Right. And he hoped the son could forgive himself eventually. Wished him well, hoped life would be kind to him.
Wow. That's very carefully worded. Acknowledging the kid's pain, but keeping a firm distance. No promises of reunion.
Precisely. It was about closure, maybe, but on his terms, separating himself.
And then the final break with the ex.
He called her, explicitly to end it, cut all contact indefinitely.
How did he explain it?
Said he could forgive them, intellectually, for what they did. But he would never forget the damage.
Forgive, but not forget. And can't move forward together.
Exactly. And when he clearly stated he didn't love him anymore, her and the son, she apparently went hysterical.
That must have been an awful call.
Sounds like it. But after that, he followed through. Blocked her everywhere, Deleted social media again. Done.
And then he physically removed himself.
Yeah. Booked that solo camping trip, Inverness. Yeah. Planned for 3 weeks. Stayed nearly 4. Just needed a complete break. Space to start healing.
A necessary act of self-preservation, it sounds like.
Totally. But even with that distance, the story wasn't quite over.
What happened next?
Sometime later, a friend told him the ex was shit-talking him on Facebook.
Oh, come on. Saying what?
Saying he'd abandoned her in the sun.
After everything he went through. Wow. How did he react to hearing that?
His final update basically said he didn't care. He was already planning to move away, start fresh somewhere else anyway. It wouldn't affect him.
And you know, that post-breakup behavior from the ex, that's where a lot of commenters really lost any remaining sympathy for her.
Absolutely. Going from needing to report, which many understood, to expecting things could just go back to normal.
Which seemed unrealistic given the trauma.
And then to actively bad-mouthing him, the person who suffered huge tangible consequences and had to leave to protect himself, that felt like a final blow.
It really reinforces that whole mud sticks idea that came up so much in the comments.
Definitely. People talked about how even when you're cleared legally, an accusation like this, especially this type, just leaves a permanent stain on your reputation.
It follows you around, makes starting over incredibly hard.
And people were also really critical of the systems involved. The police, for instance.
That public arrest at work, right, for an accusation from a 7-year-old.
Yeah. Commenters questioned the necessity of that, especially given she seemed to have no record, a stable life. The argument was that the process itself caused public shaming before guilt was properly assessed.
And some pointed out police should probably know that young trauma victims sometimes misdirect blame onto safe people. Like, is there enough training for that?
Good question. And the employer faced criticism, too. Some thought the company should have defended him more, especially once he was cleared.
Instead of just trying to manage their own risk.
Right. There was debate about the settlement. Was it enough compared to a tribunal? But acknowledging his choice for peace.
People brought up the UK context, too, like the Seville scandal making places super sensitive, maybe overly cautious.
Yeah, the public-facing jobs might react extremely strongly now, sometimes maybe overreacting before facts are clear.
And throughout all the comments, that ripple effect of trauma was just so clear.
Multiple victims here. The 7-year-old son, the 12-year-old nephew.
And OOP himself, all impacted by trauma, stemming from that original abuse.
Which led to that really intense debate about forgiving the child.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Some people really pushed for OOP to forgive the kid immediately, focus on the child's needs.
While others strongly defended OOP's right to prioritize his own healing after what he endured, arguing the child's recovery was the mother's job, probably needing therapy.
And that forcing OOP to stay when he felt such deep resentment wouldn't actually help anyone.
Exactly. Comparisons were made to other stories like this on Reddit. False accusations by stepkids, often causing irreparable harm.
It just highlights that stark reality. The mother might have felt she had to report, but the consequences for OOP were absolutely catastrophic. The damage seemed truly irreparable for those relationships.
So this deep dive, it really took us on a journey, didn't it? From a seemingly okay relationship.
Yeah, stable, bonding.
Through this sudden, devastating accusation, the legal chaos, the job fallout, the emotional roller coaster.
The confrontations, the negotiations, trying to find some kind of closure.
And ending with that lasting stain, the need to just completely start over.
The core insights here are just powerful and painful. It really shows the immense lasting damage a false accusation can cause, even when you're cleared.
Yeah, and that incredibly complicated dance between victimhood, blame, especially with kids, and trauma involved in forgiveness, how hard, maybe impossible that can be after such betrayal.
It spotlights that gap between being factually innocent and how people still perceive you.
And maybe most crucially, how systems, police, workplaces, even partners sometimes can just fail to handle these incredibly sensitive situations well, fail to protect the innocent adequately.
So why does this story matter for you, listening in? It's this raw case study, right? About how vulnerable our lives, personal and professional, are to external events, to accusations.
It makes you think about trust, how you rebuild it after it's been shattered, and the hard truth that sometimes things break so badly they just can't be fixed, no matter what anyone says or intends.
Yeah. Which leaves us with a really challenging thought, doesn't it?
It does. In a world where an accusation can fly around the globe instantly, stick like glue, how do we balance things?
How do we as people, as communities, take serious allegations seriously? Because we absolutely have to.
but also protect the fundamental principle of innocent until proven guilty. How do we safeguard the accused during that process?
And maybe even deeper, in situations as tragic and layered as this one, with trauma compounding lies, compounding consequences, what does real accountability even look like?
Especially when those lines between victim and perpetrator, or between a panicked mistake and an intentional lie, get so incredibly blurred and heartbreaking.
A lot to think about there. All right, moving on to the next story.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've got quite a stack of sources in front of us today.
Yeah, and they all center around this really powerful personal story from Reddit.
Exactly. It's a deep dive into, well, self-perception, friendship, and finding connection, sometimes love, in really unexpected ways.
And the sources, just so you know, are the original post itself, his updates over like 2.5 years, and then tons of comments from the community, which add a lot of perspective.
Right. And the core of it is this man who was just deeply, painfully convinced he was, quote, very unattractive, scarred even.
And he genuinely kind of made peace with being alone forever because of some really difficult past experiences.
But the problem, the tension, comes from his friends. They meant well, I suppose.
You think so? Oh, maybe. But they just would not stop trying to set him up on blind dates.
And often this is the key part, without telling the women beforehand what he looked like.
Yeah, which is quite something.
So our mission here really is to unpack this whole saga, from that initial conflict right through to the, frankly, surprising outcome. What can we learn?
What does his journey tell us about how we see ourselves, how friends influence us, maybe how connection actually happens sometimes?
It definitely challenges some common ideas about dating and attraction, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It's a fascinating one.
Okay, so let's dive in. Back to that original post, July 2022. He's 35, and he just lays it all out there, very honestly.
He's starkly honest, yeah. He calls his unattractiveness an objective fact, cites, facial features, body scars, saying he's difficult to look at for some people.
And that framing, objective fact, right away tells you how deep this goes. It's like this belief is non-negotiable for him.
It really signals how much that self-perception was probably the biggest barrier. Even before anyone else reacted, he just believed it so strongly.
Yeah, and he mentions trying to, compensate. He's tall, he's in great shape, has a decent job.
Things society tells you should matter.
Right. But he felt it was far from enough to make up for how he thought he looked.
And then he gets into this really painful backstory that kind of cemented it all.
Oh, it's rough. His only sexual partner, he says, really struggled with his appearance, found intimacy extremely difficult because of how he looked.
Just devastating to hear. And that experience, he says, it broke him.
Led him to swear off romance completely. Not just for himself, but he felt he needed to protect others too. He wrote, "I've hurt enough people."
Wow. So the trauma basically convinced him he was inherently harmful in a romantic context.
Exactly. So it wasn't just, I prefer being single. It felt like a necessity based on that past pain and this core belief about his looks.
Which then brings us to the friends, Sam and Sarah.
Right. Good friends. They're in relationships. They picture everyone coupled up, going on triple dates.
The classic scenario. But he doesn't date.
So they decide they'll fix that for him, whether he wants it or not, apparently.
And not gently either. He says, 7 or 8 attempts at matchmaking?
Yeah, sometimes just ambushing him, sometimes pushing him towards women at parties all night long. He really didn't like it.
He says he hated it, felt terrible for the women who were just as blindsided.
Describes getting that look, that mix of sadness and fear he felt he recognized.
He compared himself to Frankenstein's monster. Said his appearance frightens people, that he's not normal. Really harsh self-talk.
It's that double pain, isn't it? His own internal stuff constantly being, as he saw it, reflected back by others in these pressured situations.
And the trigger for the Reddit post was Sarah showing him pics of her work friend, Laura.
And revealing the plan. Invite Laura to a party, but crucially, don't show her his photo first. Don't mention his appearance.
And that was it? He just snapped?
Show them texts from previous setups of women saying basically, yeah, not physically attracted. Just laid it bare.
And how did they react?
They left. Went silent. And when he wrote the post, it had been a week. No contact.
Oof. And you can just feel the panic in his writing then.
Totally. But his main worry wasn't losing a shot at romance. He'd accepted being alone in that way.
It was the friendship, wasn't it?
Exactly. He wrote, "I've made my peace, but I need friends." That just hits hard. The potential isolation.
Yeah. And in the comments on that post, he added more details, right, about the depth of the insecurity.
He did. Mentioned he wouldn't share a picture online because the last person he trusted shared one specifically so others could laugh at him.
Oh, that's just brutal. That kind of betrayal.
Yeah.
It explains so much of the caution, the walls he put up.
Absolutely. He even pushed back against suggestions like dating someone visually impaired.
But not because he wasn't interested. Right. It was framed differently.
Yeah, he framed it as wanting to protect them from societal judgment or from people thinking he was taking advantage. Still centered on that idea of him causing harm. I've heard enough people.
It really shows how fundamental that belief had become, that he was inherently damaging.
There was also this interesting point from the comments he really appreciated. A top comment, now deleted, unfortunately.
What was the gist?
It compared his friend's actions to trying to set up a gay friend with someone of the opposite sex.
Ah, okay. Highlighting the disrespect for his stated identity and choices.
Exactly. It's about respecting boundaries, respecting someone's lived reality and their choices about their own life, even if you don't fully get it or agree.
That makes sense. And he made another important clarification in those comments too, didn't he?
Yeah, he said that while the insecurities were always there, that really intense negativity, the Frankenstein stuff, it mostly came out when he was being pressured into dating.
So his baseline wasn't constant despair, it was the pressure triggering the trauma.
Right, which is a crucial distinction. Okay, so that was the low point. But then things shifted really fast.
But surprisingly fast. The first update came just 4 days later.
And it was a very happy update, as he put it.
So communication actually worked.
It did. He reached out to Sam and Sarah. They met up. Apparently they felt awful, apologized properly.
And agreed to stop the matchmaking pressure.
Yes,
Yeah.
That was the key. Friendship saved. His main worry was resolved.
That alone is a pretty positive outcome, just showing that talking honestly can work, even when things seem really stuck.
But then, the story takes another turn. After they make up, Sam and Sarah invite him to just a casual hangout. Some work friends are going to be there.
Let me guess. Laura was going to be there?
You got it. The same Laura from the blind date plan.
Okay, but this time was different.
Totally different vibe. Explicit promise. No pressure or matchmaking. Just a casual get-together. Low stakes.
And meeting her like that, casually...
Made all the difference. He said they just clicked. Found shared interests, both in IT, like the same movies. Easy conversation.
So the outcome wasn't a date, it was.
He just made a new friend.
Yeah.
That was it. The pressure was off, so they could just connect as people.
Based on personality, shared stuff, not romantic expectations.
And it seems Laura felt that connection too, because she invited him over for movies and pizza the very next night.
Wow, okay. So things moved quickly on the friendship front.
Yeah. And at the end of that first update, he's like, social life's good, friends are good, made a new friend. Still thinks he's ugly, mind you.
But overall...
Very happy. You can really feel that shift from the first post. The relief is palpable.
Okay, but the story doesn't end there. There's a big time jump, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fast forward 2.5 years. This is where it gets really interesting. The final update.
And this one reveals just how much that casual, no-pressure meeting changed, well, everything for him.
So he and Laura kept hanging out more and more. And then, get this, she asked him out.
Whoa. Not the other way around.
Nope. He was initially terrified, that old trauma kicking in. But he said yes.
And crucially, what was her perspective on his appearance, the scars he was so focused on?
He says she's just not bothered by them.
Mm-hmm.
She looks at him with, quote, kindness and warmth that is indescribably wonderful. She just saw him, the person.
That's incredibly powerful, just acceptance.
And now,
yeah,
still together, living together. And he says he plans to propose early next year.
Wow. That's an amazing outcome from where he started.
Isn't it? And the friends, Sam and Sarah.
Still in the picture.
Yep, still great friends. And now they actually do get to go on those triple dates they always wanted.
Huh. So they got their wish in the end, just not the way they originally tried to force it.
Exactly. Hosted a Friendsgiving together. Apparently Laura loves hosting. So the friendship dynamic found a healthy balance once the pressure was off and his boundaries respected.
That's great to hear. But maybe the most significant part is the personal transformation he talks about.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He reveals that having the support system, Laura, his friends, finally gave him the strength to seek mental health help.
For the insecurities, the trauma.
Yeah. He'd been in therapy for over a year at the time of the update, making slow but steady progress.
That's huge. And he connects it back to the relationship, doesn't he?
He does, with this incredibly moving line. I love her more than I ever hated myself.
Wow.
Says her love is his rock. making the therapy work easier. It wasn't a magic cure, but it was the foundation that let him start healing.
Support enabling the hard work, not replacing it.
Precisely. And he said he wrote the update to kind of pay back the kindness from strangers online who helped him when he felt he was in a very dark place.
He never thought he'd be allowed to imagine a life with someone, he said. Feels like a lucky man. It's quite the arc.
It really is. So let's unpack the meaning here. What do we take away from this whole journey and all those comments?
Well, one huge theme, obvious from the story and the comments, is that stark contrast between the forced blind dates and the organic connection with Laura.
Right. Everyone seemed to agree, including OOP himself, that taking the pressure off was the absolute game changer.
Yeah, because a date, especially a blind one, sets up immediate expectations, judgment almost. Is this person attractive enough? Is there instant chemistry?
Pressure to decide right away. Like one commenter said, pressure to decide whether or not someone is attractive in the first few times you meet them.
Exactly, but meeting casually, as friends first. It lets personality come through, shared interests, how you actually interact.
People in the comments called it love on second sight. Not being wowed initially, maybe even being put off, but developing attraction after getting to know the person.
That casual setting let them, their connection, be the focus, not the pressure of a romantic evaluation.
Then there's that whole tension we talked about, his intense self-loathing versus the other things he had going for him. Tall, fit, job.
Yeah, the comments really chewed on that. How much was objective reality versus just crippling insecurity amplified by trauma?
Many felt the insecurity was the bigger wall. That being kind, interesting, confident could outweigh physical concerns for many people.
Though it's fair to acknowledge the pushback too. Some commenters stressed that significant physical differences do create real challenges, especially initially. We can't just dismiss his experience.
True. It's complex. His trauma was real. But meeting Laura in a low-pressure way allowed her to see him first, beyond the features he obsessed over.
And what about the friends Sam and Sarah? What's the takeaway on their role?
Well, the consensus seemed to be intentions may be good, methods really bad.
Definitely. Ignoring boundaries, the secrecy about his appearance, assuming they knew best, that saving the single friend mentality someone mentioned.
He just showed a fundamental lack of respect for his autonomy, his feelings, his choices.
Yeah, the story really drives home how crucial it is to respect where your friends are at, even if you wish things were different for them. Real support is acceptance.
And that line, I love her more than I ever hated myself, that really hit home for people reading it.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it, about how love and support aren't the cure, but they can be the catalyst. The foundation.
Gave him the safety and strength to finally tackle those deep-seated issues with professional help. The love became the rock, as he said.
It shifted the narrative from just a love story to a healing story, facilitated by connection.
So for you listening, how does this story make you think about those common ideas around dating? Attraction, self-worth.
Does it make you question the pressure we put on first impressions, maybe? Or how much our internal story affects things?
What really stands out to you about the difference between that blind date setup and just meeting casually in a group?
It's definitely a powerful reminder that genuine connection can happen in really unexpected ways, often when we least force it.
So yeah, we started with this guy in a really dark place, resigned to being alone, struggling with his self-image, dealing with friends who weren't helping.
Then we saw that turning point, difficult conversation, boundary set, leading to that low-pressure meeting.
And followed it over years to finding real love, support, stronger friendships, and crucially, the motivation to start healing through therapy.
The big takeaways feel pretty clear. The immense power of self-perception, how it shapes our reality, the absolute need for respecting boundaries and friendships.
How connection and even love can bloom when you take away the pressure cooker environment of forced dating.
And maybe most importantly, the incredible transformative impact of finding supportive relationships that empower you to face your own stuff and grow.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe for you to mull over. Thinking about his journey, how much do our own internal stories, the ones we tell ourselves about who we are and what's possible for us, and maybe the stories others try to write for us, how much do those shape our paths to connection, possibly even more than our objective circumstances?
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive today. We hope it gave you plenty to consider.